So when we left off, Hitler had managed to take over Scandinavia working with Joseph Stalin. And the biggest effect of this was to leave Britain exceptionally vulnerable. Within Britain, they also had a little bit of chaos going on because Parliament and many of the regular citizens of the English island blamed everything going on in Europe on Chamberlain's weakness. Chamberlain had appeased Hitler, and now Hitler's going crazy and taking stuff over. So Chamberlain's going to wind up stepping down as prime minister, and he's going to be replaced by a guy named Winston Churchill. And Churchill is exceptionally important in world history. This happens on May 10th, 1940. A little bit of background about him. He was half American. He smoked and drank a lot. He had tons of world experience. I list them there for you. Soldier, statesman, reporter, author, pilot, former prisoner of war. He kind of had just done it all. And he was the perfect person to have this position during the war. If anybody else had been prime minister during World War II, odds are they would not have been able to have been as strong, diplomatic, and inspirational as Churchill was. So this is certainly a man that you want to remember. And here's pictures of him. And he's going to come back up lots and lots of times, not just throughout this PowerPoint in World War II, but, after World War II, he's still going to remain fairly influential, terming the phrase the Iron Curtain and stuff like that during the Cold War. Of course, Britain's biggest ally is France. France is busy doing some stuff not so good. Following World War One, the French had learned their lesson. If we remember the von Schlieffen Plan, when the Germans had used neutral Belgium to march into France, they just like that. So the French had decided that what they would do is they were going to build a series of forts called the Maginot Line. And they were right along this border here. Rhineland's right around here too, right? So it was kind of a double protection of France against Germany. It was 200 miles long, but it was kind of more of like a dotted line. So it'd be like, oh, there's a little bit, and then there's nothing, and then a little bit, and then there's nothing. These were huge forts and bunkers, had lookout towers and all that stuff. And so this was their idea, defend this border, because if Germany marched in and violated the Rhineland, at least there's this backup zone. Well, needless to say, they had failed to protect that northern border with Belgium again. So there's this one dude in France named Charles de Gaulle, and he's a tank commander, and he's going to realize, hey, it's not going to take anything for the Germans to just repeat the von Schlieffen Plan, go through Belgium and come into Paris again, come into France again. And so Charles de Gaulle starts warning people. He's like, we need to extend the Maginot Line up into our Belgian and low country borders as well. No one's going to listen to him. If they had, things might have turned out differently, but you got to realize that Hitler was just super strong. Nonetheless, Charles de Gaulle, he was correct. They should have at least tried. So speaking of the Low Countries, Hitler is going to repeat the von Schlieffen Plan and march through the Low Countries, right? He's just going to go right through Belgium again to get into France. The Low Countries are the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, here done in their own flag colors. So Netherlands, right? Capital is Amsterdam. Belgium, its capital is Brussels, and Luxembourg, and its capital is Luxembourg. They're called the Low Countries because geographically they are lower than sea level. They're really well known for having built a whole bunch of dikes and levees up around in here to keep the countries from basically being succumbed by the sea. They're also sometimes referred to as the Benelux countries, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, so Benelux. Hitler thinks these are tiny little countries that are just in the way. He doesn't really care about them one way or the other. So on May 10th, 1940, he is going to parachute into Holland, the Netherlands, for the first ever large-scale airborne attack. This is the first time in world history that you've got paratroopers jumping out of planes with guns, shooting up people and stuff on the land. And when this is the first time it ever happens, you can't defend against it because you can't even predict that this would happen. So within 5 days, the Netherlands, which is the strongest of the three countries, is conquered. at this point, when the Germans actually have conquered the Netherlands and they go into Luxembourg next, and that's not going to take any effort, this is the point at which the French are going to abandon their Maginot Line and realize they need to reinforce those northern borders. So they're going to head on up to try to meet off and stop the German advances. So, original Maginot Line are these little dots here. Not entirely sure what this is supposed to represent. And they're going to spread, the French is going to spread their army like this. So from this to this, but the Netherlands have already fallen, and Germany's already in Luxembourg. So it's just too little too late. So the French are sitting here trying to protect like this huge line, that whole border, right? Their entire border that Germany could walk into. And Germany, since they've already gone into the Netherlands and Luxembourg, and they're already right there, going to conquer Belgium at the same time, since they're all right there, and the Germans are so much more powerful, they're going to wind up surrounding the French army. And so the French get themselves really kind of isolated. So the Germans have kind of gone like this around the French army. So the French call on England to come over. So this is France. They call England, hey, we need you. You come help us. And so they're going to come. And the way that the German army is able to maneuver kind of pins the British between the English Channel and the German army. So it's kind of like this weird sandwich where it's like English Channel, British, German army, French, German army. And so the English get over here and they realize we can't help you because we ourselves are going to be destroyed. They had a tiny standing army, much more of a naval power. And so Churchill realizes, okay, we're sorry, France, but we have to protect ourselves too. So he's going to order the retreat of the English army. The British were severely outnumbered. They needed to try to escape, but at this point, the British Navy is elsewhere, and so the question becomes: how are we going to get our Navy and our army to coordinate efforts? And they can't. There's not going to be enough time. The British soldiers are going to be killed, and so Churchill comes up with this plan where he calls on anybody with any type of boat. So, I mean, stop and think, do you have a boat, or do you know of a friend or a family that has any type of boat? Whether it's fishing boat, canoe, I don't think it's going to work very well, sailboat, whatever it is. If you have any type of boat, go over and save the British. And so this is going to work. 300,000 British soldiers are going to be picked up at this French city called Dunkirk, and they're going to be taken back to England. And this becomes known as the Miracle of Dunkirk, because it's like a miracle that these guys were saved. Okay, the English is saved, but what about the French? They are captured. The Germans are able, with the British army gone and with the French army weak and surrounded, the French have to surrender because the Germans make it to Paris. On June 22nd, 1940, French representatives, the story goes, in the very same boxcar that they had made the Germans sign the surrender of World War I in. I mean, that's just one of those legends. I don't know that it's still true. The French sign over the surrender, and France ceases to exist. The country is basically kind of erased of its French identity. Anything that was considered French, the Germans are going to try to eradicate and try to convince, okay, you're part of the German army now. And these are two people that had historically hated each other. And so one of the first things the Germans are going to do is they're going to move the capital of France from Paris to the city of Vichy. So from here on out, France becomes known as Vichy French. Those are the French that had worked with Hitler or collaborated with Hitler, or they were too poor to move anywhere else. Charles de Gaulle, however, is going to lead a small group of people over to England, and these people are going to continue to fight to free the French. And this becomes known as the Free French. So if you're ever asked, what were the French doing in World War II, half of them were being ruled by the Germans, that's the Vichy French, and the other half, but not really, like a couple hundred was what we're talking, were known as the Free French, and they're going to lead resistance movements, they're going to try to lead independence movements, mostly of this being pioneered from England. So don't ever call it France after June 22nd, 1940. It's Vichy France or Free French. You have to specify. Hitler also had another alliance that we need to talk about, because this alliance is going to play some part in the capturing of France, and that's Italy. Italy they were kind of mad that, they helped with the Treaty of Versailles. They were supposed to be this neutral nation who was invited to the table to help come up with decisions, and they really didn't get anything out of it. And so they were a little bit bitter. The Great Depression had hit them kind of hard. They were having struggles economically as well as with their king. And so there's going to be this dictator who takes over in Italy named Benito Mussolini. And you can see him right here. And he is a fascist. And he's actually, one of the fascist leaders in Europe before Hitler comes to power. So once Hitler has come to power, Hitler, who identifies himself as a fascist, sees in Mussolini an obvious political ally. And so these two are going to become friends, and they're going to work together. So this is Mussolini, and this is Hitler riding in the car with Mussolini, which is a little bit scary. So by 1940 into 41, the main alliances, there were three. You have the Allies, which were mostly the same allies as World War I. Britain, Australia, Free French Canada, us. We're not technically involved yet, but we are giving supplies and weapons to the Allies. The Axis, so instead of the Central Powers, in World War II, they're referred to as the Axis of evil, because the world was revolving around them. This is going to be Germany, Vichy French, Italy, and Japan. And then Russia in 1940, they're going to be part of the Axis, but eventually they're going to switch sides to the Allies, which we'll talk about momentarily. But for now, Stalin, the leader of Axis, the leader of Russia, is an Axis leader. And this is a very poor map that shows in 1942 when Russia switches. So imagine in 1940, all of this would be red as well. But at this point, it's 1942. All right, so Mussolini. What did Mussolini want? Well, Mussolini had kind of decided he was going to let Hitler take care of Europe. They've got people over in Japan and in Russia who are doing stuff in Asia. So Mussolini is going to turn his attention to Africa. So his first goal, he decides he's going to try to conquer Ethiopia. Ethiopia would give him a little bit of access to the sea for a trade route. It would also just be a stepping stone. And this is really easy to meet this goal. Like conquering Ethiopia didn't take very much. They can hardly feed themselves, so they weren't able to defend themselves. So Mussolini's like, sweet, I've conquered Ethiopia, next. The next logical step would be to go to a slightly stronger country or a nearby country. Instead, Mussolini turns his attention to Egypt. Egypt is like the most powerful African country at this time, so why he would choose Egypt is slightly ridiculous. But he did need it for one piece of control, and that's the Suez Canal. Egypt controlled this little strip of land with a canal attached called the Suez Canal, that if Mussolini was able to conquer it, he would have the Mediterranean Sea, and then he'd be able to flow into the Red Sea and then into the Persian Gulf, which would give him the oil that he needed. So that's the plan, that's the idea behind it. The problem was that Egypt was allies with Britain at this point in time, and there was a significant British army there with the Egyptians. And so the Egyptian-British alliance is going to square off against Italy and get to the point where Italy is almost defeated. Hitler has to send in troops to bail out the Italians. And he sends in this tank commanding group led by a guy named Erwin Rommel, who is nicknamed the Desert Fox because he's so sly and so sneaky in the desert with fighting. Rommel, definitely a very, very good commander in general, one of the strongest, most powerful, particularly in desert fighting. As a result, Rommel arriving is enough to defeat the British and let the Italians win. But it was so close of a margin that the agreement was, okay, Italy, you can control Egypt, but you can't control the Suez Canal. The British get to keep the Suez Canal. It was a little bit of a ridiculous decision, but this is the Suez Canal. So Italy would have had all of this down this way they would have had access to, and then into the Persian Gulf. So the Suez Canal is this part of Egypt.